In January 1968, a band was driving to a show. Someone in the car said, "Shall we pick Syd up?" And someone else said, "Let's not bother." So they didn't. The man they left behind had named the band, had written their first hit, had built their sound from nothing and turned it into something the world had never heard before. His name was Syd Barrett, and this is the story of who he was before they stopped picking him up. Roger Keith Barrett was born on the 6th of January 1946 in Cambridge, England. He was the fourth of 5 children. His father, Arthur Max Barrett, was a pathologist, a man whose work concerned itself with the internal reality of things, with what lay beneath the surface. His mother, Winifred, encouraged all of her children toward the arts. From an early age, Roger showed a particular kind of restless creativity. He won a school prize for piano duet when he was 7. He learned the ukulele, the banjo, the guitar. He wrote poetry. He drew and painted obsessively. He was also, by all accounts, a remarkably magnetic child. Easy to like, easy to follow. The sort of person who made a room feel different simply by being in it. It was sometime around 1959 that he acquired the nickname that would eventually replace his given name entirely. A local jazz musician named Syd Barrett had died, and someone, the accounts vary on exactly who, began calling young Roger Syd in tribute. The name stuck. By the time he left Cambridge for London, almost nobody called him Roger anymore. Among his closest friends growing up was a boy named Roger Waters. They attended the same school, shared a love of music, and had the kind of friendship that forms between people who sense, without being able to articulate it, that they are going somewhere together. In 1962, Syd Barrett arrived in London. He enrolled at the Camberwell College of Arts. He was 16 years old, slight and beautiful, with dark, curly hair and eyes that people consistently described as extraordinary. Wide, bright, present in a way that made you feel seen. London in the early 1960s was beginning to change. The city that had been gray and bombed out and strictly rationed a decade earlier was loosening. Music was arriving from America. Blues, rock and roll, the first tremors of something enormous. Young people were beginning to feel that the rules they had inherited might not apply to them. Syd Barrett absorbed all of it. He went to concerts, he haunted record shops. He sat in the flats of musicians and listened to recordings that were making their way across the Atlantic. He painted, he played guitar. He began to write songs that didn't sound like anything else. Meanwhile, Roger Waters was studying architecture at Regent Street Polytechnic. He had formed a small band with classmates, Nick Mason on drums, Richard Wright on keyboards. They went through several names and several lineups. They needed a frontman. They needed someone who could take what they were doing and make it mean something. In 1965, Syd Barrett joined the band, and everything changed. The band had been called many things: the Sigma Six, the Megadeths, the Abdubs, the T-Set. None of them stuck. One night in 1965, facing a last-minute booking crisis, another band called the T-Set was already on the bill. Syd Barrett reached for a name on the spot. He looked at the record sleeves around him and combined the first names of 2 Georgia blues musicians, Pink Anderson and Floyd Council. Pink Floyd. It was a name that meant nothing and everything simultaneously. It was playful and slightly absurd. Exactly the kind of thing Syd Barrett would invent on a Tuesday night under mild pressure. And it stuck, the way the best things stick, because it was impossible to forget. By 1966, Pink Floyd had found management and were playing the London underground scene regularly. They were the house band at the UFO Club in Tottenham Court Road, a basement venue that became the center of the British psychedelic movement. Every week, hundreds of young people gathered in the dark beneath the city to hear music that seemed to come from somewhere outside ordinary experience. Syd Barrett was the reason they came. He was not just the frontman and the songwriter. He was the visual and spiritual center of the whole thing. He wore mirrored discs sewn into his clothing so that the light show played across him as he played. He improvised freely, stretching songs beyond their written forms into something exploratory and strange. He seemed, on stage, to be genuinely somewhere else, somewhere the audience wanted to follow. In February 1967, Pink Floyd entered Abbey Road Studios to record their debut album. They recorded in Studio 3, the same building, the same time, as the Beatles were finishing Sgt. Pepper's in Studio 2. The two sessions occasionally overlapped. John Lennon wandered in once to watch. The Beatles were the biggest band in the world, and they were working next door. Pink Floyd didn't care. They were making something entirely their own. The album was called The Piper at the Gates of Dawn, a reference to a chapter in The Wind in the Willows, a book Syd Barrett had loved as a child. Of the 11 songs, Barrett wrote 8 and co-wrote 2 more. The songs were unlike anything on the charts. Astronomy Domine opened with a list of planets read over a shortwave radio crackle. Interstellar Overdrive was a nearly 10-minute improvised space journey with no conventional structure. Bike ended with a room full of strange mechanical sounds. The Gnome told the story of a gnome named Grimble Grumble. It was playful and terrifying and beautiful and completely original. It reached number 6 on the British album charts. Before the album was even released, Pink Floyd had released 2 singles, Arnold Lane and See Emily Play, that had both entered the top 10. Syd Barrett wrote both of them. By the summer of 1967, Syd Barrett was 21 years old and one of the most celebrated musicians in Britain. Nobody agrees on exactly when it started. Some say it was gradual, a slow drift that began in early 1967 and accelerated through the summer. Others say it happened suddenly over the course of weeks, as if a switch had been thrown. What is agreed is this. By the autumn of 1967, Syd Barrett was no longer entirely present, not in the way he had been. LSD was part of the story. The psychedelic scene that had made Pink Floyd famous was also, for some of its participants, genuinely dangerous. Barrett had been using it heavily, sometimes reportedly every day. Whether the drug caused what followed or revealed something that was already there is a question that nobody has been able to answer definitively. Roger Waters later said he believed it was both. What his bandmates began to notice was a kind of blankness. Syd would stand on stage and not play, or play one chord for an entire song, or detune his guitar slowly and deliberately while the audience watched. In television appearances, he gave one-word answers or said nothing at all, staring at a fixed point somewhere past the interviewer's head. He stopped recognizing people he had known for years. He arrived at rehearsals without knowing why he was there. On tour in America during a television appearance, he refused to lip-sync with the rest of the band and simply stood motionless while the cameras rolled. His bandmates were frightened. They were also increasingly a professional band with commitments and bookings and a career to manage. The two things: care for Syd and the survival of Pink Floyd were becoming impossible to hold simultaneously. In December 1967, they invited David Gilmour, an old Cambridge friend of Syd's, to join the band as a second guitarist, hoping to keep Syd while managing his inability to perform reliably. It didn't work, and so in January 1968, they were driving to a show, and someone said, "Let's not bother," and they didn't pick him up. If this story moved you, subscribe. There are more of them, and not one of them ordinary.